I think a cool place to start would be kind of just what is DueDil? Kind of give everybody who doesn't know the brief introduction.
Yeah, sure. So DueDil is a company intelligence platform. So basically we use data to tell the story behind every business. And really at the heart of kind of our technology and what we do as a business is we go out and extract, clean, and link together data from a multitude of different sources on companies and the people behind them. So ultimately, we want to try and bring as much transparency to private companies as exists on public companies.
Cool. And a little bit about company history. How long has it been around, sort of stage, just to kind of give people a little bit of context of where we're at?
So, as you can probably tell from my accent, I'm not from here. I'm from the States originally. Started my career over there after graduating from university, and joined a kind of early stage, growth stage fintech business, which was headquartered in New York. After about a year and a half in the U.S., I actually went with the business out to APAC. So. I was based in Hong Kong, Singapore, Tokyo for 4 years, setting up offices, practice areas, that sort of thing. And then 10 years ago, moved to the UK for what I thought was going to be a extended layover at graduate school. And then somehow got a wife, a co-founder, a house, 2 kids with funny accents. The whole thing just happened very, very quickly. So we started, DueDil's 8 years old. We're a kind of growth stage business. We've raised just under 30 million pounds of equity. We're 65 people today. Our clients are mainly enterprises and kind of high growth businesses that have a lot of exposure to SMEs. So on the big end of things, that would be a bank like Santander's Corporate and Commercial Bank, or an insurer. At the smaller end of the spectrum, or the high growth end of the spectrum, we work with a lot of really cool companies like Hakodo, who's an insurtech business. We work with TransferWise for Business, who's obviously now a much bigger company. So, tech and financial services is really a kind of sweet spot for us.
Cool. I'm really interested to just dive right in, because my experience with DueDil, I don't even know when, but was me as an individual, because I was just like curious about kind of looking at company financials and things, because I was nerdy. But like just signing up on my own, access to this platform, and it seems like that's been a bit of a transition over the course of the business of like how you think about customers that you're going after and segments that you're focusing on.
Totally.
Can you talk a little bit about that kind of whole learning transition?
Yeah, that was a long road of learning. So, I mean, I think one of the really cool things about DueDil was, and certainly one of the things that attracted me to it was, for me, there's a kind of emotional resonance in what we do in terms of helping people understand companies and the people behind them. There are all kinds of benefits to that, from really practical business benefits to sort of more societal benefits around helping stem corruption and increasing transparency. And so that all really resonated with me. And I was also kind of attracted to this idea of trying to make a really unsexy area sexy. And that was sort of what led us to the free version of the product, which it sounds like you were kind of interacting with early. And so, back in the kind of heady days of VC in London, when it was all a bit new and people were starting to raise bigger and bigger rounds and trying to pretend like we all lived in Silicon Valley, even though we don't. We were looking at how can we really like juice the profile of the business as we look to raise money. And it took us roughly kind of 18 months to get our first 25,000 free users on the platform. And then we really started focusing on this, being like, hey, we can maybe get more free users on the platform. And if we get a lot of free users, then maybe we can make them paid users. And so, first 18 months to get to 25,000. Next 18 months, we got to 1.25 million. And so we had this like massive ramp up in these free users on the platform, and we were able to tell a very good story about the engagement of those users with the free product. And if we only convert X% at Y, then we've got a massive business, and people were kind of buying that. And the challenge that I guess you have when you sort of pursue that strategy is that a proxy for revenue is not revenue, and there are lots of ways that you can kind of spin metrics, and if you kind of give away something for free that people used to pay for, then you're going to be popular, right? I think the real learning as we kind of went on that journey from a free product to an enterprise grade product was really understanding the pain points of the people that we're, for whom we're addressing them, right? So, if you think about that, if you think about DueDil as a proposition, right, and those we'll go back to the like 1 million odd free users. I was kind of hoping, as I was preparing for the Series A, we knew we needed to think about, who are these users? Like, what's the narrative around the funding to help us, cut a path to monetization? And I was hoping that we were going to have what I called our LinkedIn moment. And the LinkedIn moment was basically the moment that I imagined someone at LinkedIn had in like 2005, where they went on to LinkedIn and they were like, wow, all of our highest and highest using, most engaged users are in HR. We should build some stuff for people in HR, right? And I looked at the DueDil user base, and we didn't have the LinkedIn moment. There wasn't any one industry, any one profile where people were just like smashing the product, right? We had a lot of people using it for a lot of different things. And so then you sort of have this picture emerge of a chessboard, right? And you have different job titles in different industries. And the challenge around DueDil at the beginning was that we covered a lot of that chessboard. So people were engaging with the product for a lot of different reasons, trying to do many different things. And some of them were casual, and some of them were, using it for, really kind of deep, more intense use cases. And so basically we had to figure out within that chessboard who is extracting disproportionate value from our product, and therefore who can we kind of capture more of that value ourselves, right? And that process of going from a freemium kind of B2C online self-serve product to more of a kind of enterprise grade product took all kinds of twists and turns, but ultimately came back to understanding, who's the user, what's their problem, and how do they buy? And I think the how do they buy is something that particularly people in B2B SaaS often don't think enough about.
Yeah. Did you have a period of time where you were serving those two customer types? You had the one that you knew you were providing this kind of disproportionate value to, and the one that sort of you were probably providing quite a lot of value to, but you weren't extracting any value yourself. Yeah. And sort of, what did you learn from kind of trying to navigate between those? Because sort of there's this big thing, and like we have it every day when we're thinking about going upstream as well. Like sort of, you have 1 million people in your case, or over 1 million people that you kind of don't want to piss off, like have like really come to love the thing that you've built and extracting value, using it in their day-to-day lives. And
So I mean, we and so I guess a couple things on that. One is, free users aren't free, right? Like they actually cost you something. But we did build up a lot of kind of brand awareness within the broader market by providing that free version of the product, and we still provide that free version of the product, right? And this is still, by the way, something that we're kind of learning as we go in terms of how do we create a nurture stream which reliably helps identify, if not convert, people from being a free casual user to being a kind of enterprise user where they're really getting a lot of value out of the product. So that's still very much a work in progress. I wouldn't claim that we've completely cracked it, but I think for us, the journey that we're sort of on is figuring out how do you, within the free product, if you have that as a strategy, how do you position the value on the kind of broader product so that you are getting people down that buyer journey. You're building the right kind of awareness, because in spite of all of the great traction we got early in the market, it still kills me that if you go out and you ask somebody about DueDil, there's a reasonable chance, like if you're in London, that somebody will go like, oh yeah, I've heard of DueDil. And then you're like, what does DueDil do? And then they'll go, oh, it's like Free Company's House. And you're just like, no, we're not Free Company's House. Like, we're powering the digital onboarding journey for like 50 UK financial institutions. Like, it's more than Free Company's House, right? But so I think you have to kind of balance out the, how you're kind of managing your brand in the market and like what aspects of the product you're showing to people to give them the right impression and engage with, have them engage with you in the right way.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things. I remember the first one of these that we did was with Patrick Campbell from Price Intelligently and ProfitWell. And he basically got up and like just screamed that like freemium is not a pricing strategy.
He screamed that at me. Yeah.
Do you work with them as well for
well, yeah, we did early on. Yeah, and I think I've heard it from Patrick. I've heard it from other people, but I think you have to, the easy thing I think is to, people. It's less true now, but before people were like, oh, freemium, right? But I think you have to really question what role freemium plays in your go-to-market strategy before you just sort of like barrel into freemium. Because for some people, there are like legitimate cases where freemium or some kind of like flywheel like adoption of the product works really well, right? There's some of the biggest SaaS businesses in the world have been built on that model. So yeah, it could work, but you have to understand the market you're in, how people buy, like capital constraints, because for some people, freemium is just a marketing strategy, right? And like you have to basically chalk it up as a marketing cost, not a, not necessarily a sales strategy.
Yeah. One of the things I'm really interested in, because I know, so this is recorded and it goes out online, and we have a ton of both our customers and like just general people who run SaaS businesses who watch it, is I think there are a lot of businesses who are kind of going through transitions like this, be them sort of very deliberate ones because they want to capture more market or extract more value. But one of the things that we hear quite a lot is like, how do you, and I guess this is sort of two questions, is one, kind of how do you internally in the business kind of reposition sort of people's efforts around like, something's very different from maybe the moment that I joined the company and the thing that I thought we were building to the thing that we're building now, which maybe for fewer people, it may be sold to financial institutions rather than providing for how do you kind of manage that, I guess, cultural change and focus change?
It's tough because, the truth is, I mean, you know as well, right? Like the thing you thought you were building at the beginning is not necessarily the thing that you end up building, right? And who you end up building it for. I'm sure there are these like people who walk on water who just like can see the market perfectly and they're like, we're going for that, and they go for it and they execute it brilliantly and it's done. But more often than not, it's this like winding, like circuitous route to like get to product market fit, scale, all that stuff. So yeah, you have to sort of manage people's expectations and their experience of the business along the way. And I think this was particularly true with us because, when we started, the identity was very much this sort of like free product, democratizing access to information. But then, like 2 years in, like Company's House beta comes out. And if you just want to like check stuff on Company's House and you know what you're looking for, then like, it's great that the UK is so transparent. Go there, right? So you sort of then are like, okay, well now this story has a slightly different, kind of nuance to it, and bringing people along that journey is really important. So I don't know that I have the answer, but I can tell you kind of what we did, right? And this sort of coincides with my transition from COO to CEO, because I was COO of the business for the first 6 years, and I took over as CEO last year. And one of the challenges that I had in making that transition was, when you're a CEO coming into a business, particularly when you're coming in from the outside, everybody recognizes that you have kind of this mandate for change, right? Like you're doing something different. But when you've been around the business for 6 years and you're part of the furniture, people are like, yeah, right, we've heard this before, don't believe it, whatever. And so you have to kind of find ways of, constantly helping people reinvest emotionally in the business and the mission, and it was really important to us, and it's still really important to us to continue to prove to people along the way that there's a coherent strategy here. Like, this is the mission. This is what we're executing against, right? And so there are all these habits that come in terms of the way we communicate with the team, the types of meetings we run, how we've changed the management team meetings to run them differently, the leadership structure in the business. All of these things, I think, help. And at the end of the day, let's face it, like, people, particularly in London, there are a lot of young people who are early in their careers. It's perfectly fine for people to kind of like do a tour of duty and then say, actually, you know what, I've kind of done my tour of duty, now I want to go and get different experience, right? And ultimately you want to build a business where you have people who have a diverse set of experiences and they're kind of at different points in their career journey. And I think just having open and honest conversations about that is fine, because if people want to get off the bus, then they should get off the bus.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm interested in kind of product market fit as well. And
yeah, me too.
And I think how did that change? Like, through this sort of, was it the initial transition from we have 1.25 million people using our product to we need to figure out who's getting a ton of value from it right now? And I guess I'm assuming, I'm taking some liberties, I'm assuming that was like based on industry or kind of use case or something. Like, are they using it for KYC, kind of AML stuff? Are they using it for like credit check kind of things? Like, how did approach to product market fit and evaluating those things and figuring out how you prioritize what you build next when you have basically every option, and there's probably more than one pocket of people who you can extract a lot of value from? Like, how do you actually evaluate these things and sort of not be leaving kind of money on the table or sort of silo yourself in a certain direction that you can't kind of deviate from?
Yeah. And I think this was one of the challenges of DueDil, and reconciling these tensions continues to be something that we talk a lot about, right? So I should have probably said at the beginning what people actually use DueDil for, right? So we are the most comprehensive source of information on companies and the people behind them in the UK. We're now expanding across Europe. What do people use that information for? There are really kind of three core use cases that people have around DueDil. One is identifying, if you're a B2B business, it's identifying that it's kind of, from an account-based approach, identifying the businesses that you should be going after, right? So what we tend to see is that, you sort of start selling stuff, and then you go through a renewal cycle and an upsell cycle, and then you realize that, actually you were selling to 25 different types of businesses, but only 10 of them actually, stick around and have positive net revenue retention. And so you're like, okay, these are forming an ideal customer profile. Let's go get more of those, right? So you kind of have a sense of what that ideal customer profile looks like, but you might not know the full list of all those companies, right? So one of the ways that we saw people using DueDil early on was to say, right, I know that my ideal customer profile are businesses in Manchester, Leeds, Liverpool, Birmingham, who are doing more than 10 million of revenue in manufacturing, right? Like, we have every single one. If you're a B2B business, we have every single one of your current and future customers in our product, right? So you can like extract that super quickly, understand that business, push that data into your CRM, keep it clean, right? So that's the sort of, go-to-market or acquisition side of what we do. But then, there's actually a whole nother part around onboarding and risk assessing those businesses, which is also coming through as a very strong use case. So, okay, I know who I'm selling to. Now I need to do a bunch of checks to make sure the business is who they say they are, the people are who they say they are. I need to make a credit decision on them, right? So, that kind of fed through. And holding these two things, which have different markets and different use cases, into like one container that feels coherent was a real challenge for us. Now, the breakthrough, I think, came when, just through having conversations with clients and looking at whatever data we had to realize that actually, there are some people who need this whole end-to-end customer journey, right? And this is where we were seeing a lot of traction within large financial institutions who had SME lines of business, who wanted to know which businesses they should be taking on. They had a KYB, KYC, AML obligation to fulfill, and they had some credit exposure to them, right? So we were able to take this process that previously took them weeks of like manual intervention, teams, application forms, tons of data gathering from all different sources, and just completely transform that digital onboarding experience for them. So, now the customer comes in, they start to type in the name of their business, it pre-populates the application form, does the KYB, KYC, brings through the financials, fills out completes the underwriting or lending decisioning process. So how we got there, I think, was really just staying close to our clients and then realizing like where these pockets existed and then trying to find out ways of like scaling that.
How do you think about like scaling that today? Like obviously still have incredible brand recognition, incredible base of, I guess, free customers. It sounds like early days, raising the first kind of couple of rounds of funding, it was very much inbound driven. Like, we're an inbound company, we're building this free repository of information, we're gonna get a bunch of people in, see where we add value. Is that shifted? Is it kind of inbound still the focus? Is it outbound? And then kind of, I imagine there is this kind of sales organization now. Like, what does that look like, and how do you think about it?
So if we kind of go back to like what would I have done differently if we had to do this all over again, the way I would characterize our early go-to-market approach as very sales-led, and very kind of manual, for lack of a better word.
Was that was that like an inside sales approach to these free people who are signing up, or was it outbound?
Yeah, no. So it was sort of leveraging the free user base, but outbounding to them.
Okay.
But very kind of like one-to-one, like high volume SDR type predictable revenue model, right? And I think where we've moved towards is, I think the way that people buy SaaS has changed a bit in the last 5 to 10 years. So that's sort of context that you need to be aware of. But I think where we've started to try and move to is, we're still doing some of that outbound, but really focus more on the high-end strategic accounts. On the kind of demand gen side of things, we're trying to be much more marketing-led, and we're also using marketing not just to try and drive that inbound, which we're still at the early days of, but we're also using it as a way to test the messaging in general, right? Because we do still have quite a lot of traffic to our homepage, a lot of free users. We sort of have enough scale there that we can figure out which messages are converting. So I think if I had to do this all over again, I probably would have not invested as much so early into a sales-led go-to-market approach, and probably led more with marketing as a way to really refine those messages.
How I'm interested in how, kind of with such a strong, I guess, early inbound channel, how do you kind of overcome what I guess is a good proportion of people having this like preconceived notion of what you guys do, who may have used the product at one point like me, and then now I'm in an organization which would probably be a pretty good candidate to be a customer. Like, how do you think about that
Reset
education? How do you actually give people a fresh look and actually approach a sales process kind of in a way that sets you up for success, as opposed to kind of spending the first X number of calls or whatever just getting over the
history. Yeah. So it's a really good question, and it's still something that we're kind of working through. I think one of one of my observations in terms of helping reset those people's perceptions around the brand, the product, whatever, has been, when you come from a free product background or freemium model, and you have a lot of this inbound, the inbound tends to be quite low value transactional, right? And so the question is really, how do you cross that chasm from a sort of transactional style sale, which is much more point solution driven, to one which is more strategic and enterprisey, And I think the short answer is that, again, that was quite a sales-led approach. But at the enterprise level, it kind of had to be a sales-led approach because you have to sort of have the conversations at the right level within big organizations where you can reframe the value for them. Once you've been successful at doing that a few times, I think one of the most powerful things that we've done is actually just started telling our client stories much more effectively because there starts to be a little bit, you create dissonance for people who started to view you one way and then they're like, well, wait a minute, why are all these big banks and insurers using these guys, right? Why are all these high growth kind of unicorns or nearly wannabe unicorns using these guys? Like what is it about the story that I kind of missed, right? So that creating that dissonance is kind of a way to reset the frame, but actually then selling them on the value has really been something that I think our clients have led the conversation on. And so we've moved from the just hire a bunch of SDRs and smash the phones to more of a kind of one-to-many approach where we're having clients front and center much more talk about the types of problems and challenges that they've overcome. And if they talk about how they use DueDil to do that, then great, right?
When you're going through that process, which is kind of iterative process over time of okay, we're going from kind of very low level B2C kind of to kind of mid level, probably trying to monetize those customers in some way, to then enterprise deals. I imagine you have this kind of sort of, correct me if I'm wrong, but sort of at one point had this sort of disparate, reasonably disparate set of actually paying customers and revenue. How do you even think about that, and how do you think about how you decide which customers you're okay to kind of say goodbye to, and how do you make those decisions of offboarding customers, or do you just leave it and revenue is revenue?
Yeah. So this was part of what I prioritized when I took over as CEO, because I feel like the word strategy gets bandied around a lot, and it was so much so that I kind of lulled myself into this false sense that oh yeah, I know what strategy is. We have a strategy, and actually the more you start to dig into it and really understand what strategy means and that there's a way to go about it, you realize that very few people actually do it well. And I'm not saying that I think we did it well, but it kind of gets to the answer of your question, which was which customers are you okay saying goodbye to. The only way you can do that is by really understanding the economics around those customers. And so, we had, to kind of, illustrate this point, we had the very smallest clients would be paying us kind of 5,000 ACV a year type contracts, all the way up to mid six-figure ACV type contracts. So there really is a huge range there. When we did a strategy exercise with a guy who had 25 years, mainly in doing strategy for telco and SaaS. He was an ex-Cambridge math and stats guy. And his approach was basically, give me all your data, and I will tell you which clients are profitable and which ones aren't. And so we went through this exercise, and he kind of mapped out all of the different client segments we were selling into, gave us a drains up view of this is how much it costs you to acquire, this is how much you're retaining, upselling, everything, right? And it was, it got ridiculous to the point where I had people in the management team going this guy James just asked me how big my desk is, to know how much space I'm taking up in the office. I think he's on the wrong track here. And I was just stay with it. There's a process here. We're getting through it. And sure enough, he came through the other end, 120 slides on forensically evaluating which customers were worth hanging on to and which ones weren't. And there were some real surprises there. So he, once we kind of reaffirmed that yes, the bigger clients are great for us, right? And he's you can afford to spend a little bit longer selling to them, but this is the minimum that you need to sell at in order for this to be profitable and make sense. The surprise was that actually we were able to acquire customers at the very small end of the spectrum profitably, even though you typically see high churn in the SMB segment and their low average order values and everything else, right? So we were still able to acquire those and retain them profitably. And so it sort of drove us to this strategy and executing, which had a combination of kind of demand gen, which was mainly inbound point solution sales on the low end, and then more of a strategic enterprise approach at the top end. And so then you have to think about, okay, well, how do we reshape the go-to-market function to basically execute against those two very different client needs, right? If we're kind of selling into the market.
Does that create this conflict in like the product engineering organization as well? Of like, how do we? Because like, how do you prioritize those two separate things? It's sort of, you could do it entirely commercially, but then sort of you're kind of making your own bed of like you invest more in one channel
than
like,
another. So we had to. So I mean, what you find, I think, is, we had talked about strategy for a long time, and then and you have to make tough choices and all this stuff. You hear all these stories about you have to be prepared to kill things and kill darlings and all that stuff. And we sort of went through this like pantomime of like a strategy exercise for a really long time, where we were like kind of coming up with tough choices just to feel like we were making tough choices. But where it starts to really work is when you realize that there are all these cascading things that actually do become tough choices that you just have to make a decision on. Because if you've committed to the strategy, then it sort of paints you into a corner in terms of like, oh man, we've committed to this. Now that means we've got to go and reorganize the way we do product and engineering, right? So that was a cascading effect of the go-to-market was like, okay, we've got a product and engineering team here. We've got these different solutions. We have too many dependencies in the way we develop stuff now. There's too much conflict in terms of deciding what gets built. So, we have to look at this in a new way. And the way that we looked at it was we said we basically have these 3 sort of solution sets for our clients, and then which we have to develop. And then we've got to expand geographically. So we need to have more, European data or US data or whatever data into the platform that we already have. And the conclusion that we came to was basically like, we want to do all these things, but we have enough product and engineering resource to do one team focused on one of the 3 solutions and one team focused on data in one of the regions. And so we just said, we're not going to worry about this other stuff for now, and we're going to fully staff and fully enable 2 of these teams to just focus on these things. And then when, we're going to collect client requirements, or people are going to tell us that they have these other things that they want us to build, but basically we're not going to build them until we have enough resource to fully staff a team that can go and focus on it. Yeah,
it's kind of like do a couple of things really well as opposed to dilute yourself across everything. And
I think that's important because, for us, the like, if you are fighting on too many fronts, you think that, you kind of can think that on the one hand, people are like, oh, wow, we're doing all these things. Isn't it great? We're really ambitious. We want to build a really big company. But actually what ends up happening is the pace of development on all of these different fronts just gets so agonizingly slow that people are like, we're going to lose momentum here, right? Yeah. So it's way better to just pile into the things that you can smash and like really build momentum behind, because that then gives you, even though it means you have to kind of press pause on some other things that you really want to do.
Yeah. Cool. I have a couple more questions, and then kind of there will be time for, if you want to submit them here, great. We also have a microphone, and we can kind of raise hands and things. But I'm interested, sort of, this might be applicable to DueDil as it is today, or might be in the future, but I'm sure it's something you think about. But sort of what are the most crucial things in your mind to have in place before you kind of expand into new territories?
So I've got a view on this because that's what I was doing for the 2 previous companies I worked for. I was always doing new, so I worked for 2 other venture-backed fintech businesses that were both New York headquartered. It was actually the same entrepreneur twice. And there were some really good lessons there because one of these businesses was like wildly successful and still is, and the other business was not, although it's still going. So one of those cases, I expanded the business into APAC, and then the other one I expanded it into Europe, which is part of the reason why I stuck around in London. So I kind of think about new market entry as a phased approach. So the way that we're thinking about it, and this might not be right for other people, and I know there are some people here at businesses who have already gone into other markets and done really well there. But for me, there are kind of three aspects to any market entry strategy. One is, kind of building out the product and the platform, right? And demonstrating the value of that, probably in the market that you're in today, right? So for us, I have no kind of hesitation in saying, like, we are category leaders in the UK and Ireland. If you want information on UK and Irish companies, we're the best, hands down, no contest, right? I can't yet say that about Europe, right? So part of the exercise that we've embarked on now is, how do we extend the value of the platform from the UK and Ireland and make it a pan-European proposition? I already have clients here in the UK who really want the pan-European data. And so once I have product validation from them on, this thing is as good as what you've provided in the UK and it does what it says it can do, then I'm basically looking at, all right, well, how do I leverage that existing client base or existing partnerships to start to push now into those territories that I want to go into, right? So that I'm not showing up on day one with, like, 2 buttons in my pocket trying to build a business, right? That's like the road to ruin, particularly if you're trying to enter a market like the US, where you can spend a ton of money and not get a lot of traction, right? So, you kind of constantly think about, like, how can I, leverage the product, then leverage the existing client base, and then, probably start. We'd probably, for instance, think about how can we use the existing inside sales function to then test some new acquisition into those markets, or use partners to get some new acquisition going in those markets. So, you're always sort of going in with a base where in an ideal situation, the base is big enough to, like, wash the face of the operation that you're setting up to then go and tackle that. And then as you test more of those messages and start to win new territory there, then you continue to scale it.
Yeah. I think one of the things that we see quite a lot, and that we've definitely been guilty of in the past, which sort of you've alluded to the solution for, is we get really excited about, like, the shiny new thing, and then are prepared to throw out the entire business that we built already in order to kind of just go and run straight at that without much validation whatsoever, other than maybe a couple of customers being like, that's cool.
Yeah.
And, like, oh, it's just shinier than the thing that we've been working on.
Yeah.
So I think, like, that's one of the things that sort of I see a lot. We are still guilty of, like, sometimes, and then kind of have to rein ourselves back.
Yeah.
But I think it's super easy to do.
No, totally. Well, I mean, look, people generally prefer to work on new things, right?
Yeah.
So it's always cool to be part of the new project, and so I think that's part of the the job of the leadership team and people in the business is, like, actually, like, the cool thing is getting results and having an impact, and maybe the thing that's going to have the biggest impact and is going to get the results is something that we're already doing, and we just need to do it better.
Yeah.
And
more focus.
Yeah, and so I think, there's always going to be a role, but I think one of the things that we've found is that as we've gone, like, I kind of characterize the first, like, 2 years of DueDil as basically an extended hackathon. Like, we were just, like, constantly hacking, like, building stuff, pushing stuff out, and that's what you do as you're trying to find product market fit. But now, we're at this point where, we have a really tight relationship with our clients. We sort of understand what the roadmap looks like in a big sense, and you want to continue to make the stuff better that is working for them. And so you kind of realize, okay, basically I have, like, maybe 1 or 2 big bets a year that I can make on new stuff, right? If we really want to support it and push it and make it successful and do it well, right? So I've got, like, maybe 1 or 2 bullets that I can fire. And so, inevitably, there's only going to be a certain number of people in the business that can be working on these new shiny things. And so we need to find a way of making what we do, delivering the core business and having a bigger impact, satisfying for people, right? And still make them feel like they're learning and growing and delivering that, right?
Cool. I think it'd be cool to get to some questions in a sec, but I'm interested in, if you were starting over or giving yourself some advice, or giving the few people here who want to start a SaaS company some advice, like, what would be, like, one, kind of a solid piece of advice that you'd give them, and 2, just thinking about some of the things that you did that we haven't spoken about early days that you would do very, very differently, knowing what you know now, kind of.
So I always get a little bit nervous, like giving people advice, because I'm not sure I'm in a great position to give people advice. But
Cautionary tales.
Yeah, cautionary tales. The one thing I think, a lot of people who want to, and there's a good reason for this, but a lot of people who want to become entrepreneurs or want to start a company, the thing they immediately gravitate towards is the fundraising side of things. They immediately think about, like, how am I going to go out and raise money? Like, what are your tips for raising money? And honestly, I would take a very different approach to fundraising if with another business. It's really, really important to remember that fundraising is a means to an end. It's not a marker of success. I kind of, one of my favorite businesses of all time, their like strategy was like, we're not going to run out of money. So these guys raised $4.5 million, and their business is worth, last time I checked, is worth $3.5 billion, right? So they were probably the people that I spoke about earlier who like really knew where they were going. They just like drove at it. They crushed it, and that's rare. But I think, getting into TechCrunch doesn't make you a successful business. Raising a massive amount of money doesn't make you a successful business, right? Like, what makes you a successful business is having something that is sustainable, having a big impact, that your clients love you, and you build a great culture, right? And so don't drink too much of the Kool-Aid on like fundraising. Now, fundraising is necessary for a lot of businesses at some stage, right? So the key there, I would say, and this is where I see a lot of people making mistakes, is they read a bunch of stuff about how to raise money from VCs, and they kind of you have to understand the stage that you're at in the funding cycle and what the investors at that stage are most concerned with. Right, so I was a mentor at the early incarnation of the Barclays Techstars accelerator, and I was having a conversation with this entrepreneur, and the stuff he was thinking about sorting out for the funding was like stuff that a public company is thinking about, right? Like, you're getting ready to like IPO, and this guy was like super concerned with like his governance structure, and I'm like, dude, you don't even have product market fit yet. Forget about your governance structure, right? Like, you just need to have a good story around like how big the problem is that you're solving, and that you're the team to do it, right? And so I think really understanding the criteria that you're being evaluated by at different stages through the funding cycle is super important. The other thing that I would say is, it's worth spending a little bit of time understanding how VCs work and the economics of a venture fund, because you're going to automatically understand what types, how you need to be pitching and presenting yourself if you really want to go after VC money. And it's also worth remembering that you might not have a business that lends itself to being funded by VC. That's okay. There's lots of other ways of getting capital to fund your business, right? So I think kind of be clear about the business you want to build and the opportunity that you're in, and then understand like how the capital needs to meet that accordingly, right? So I think that would be like one category. The other thing I would say is, once you kind of get into operating the business, I've never regretted spending time on like figuring out how the leadership needs to come together to work as a team. So all this fluffy stuff around like leadership and things, like, that's always been a good investment from my perspective, and we probably haven't done it enough, and we definitely didn't do it enough in the past. So like having a healthy team goes a long way.
Yeah, I agree massively. And I guess one of the things that I always say on the, or it's come up a few times in these, on the raising money side of things, because it tends to be a question that comes up quite a lot, is like my biggest piece of advice on that is always like align the expectation of the outcome. Like, there are many different types of investor who are shooting for many different things. Like, some of them are looking for you to be the 3x return in 4 years. Some of the times they're looking for you to be the 10x in 10 years, and sort of actually having that conversation and saying like, what is it that we're both shooting for? Like, this is a marriage. Like, super important.
Yeah, I mean, I had a funny example of this where, we were really focused on sustainable, like, cash efficient growth, right? And we've had open conversations with our investors where we're like, look, we're going to sacrifice like top line, just pure growth in order to make sure that we have like super strong unit economics, super scalable, and so that was sort of the lens that I was going into conversations with in our most recent funding round. And I was talking to this guy who's a VC over from the Valley, and I was like, I mentioned, cash flow break even or scalable, sustainable growth or something like that, like a few times. And the guy just stopped me and he goes, yo, you've mentioned this phrase like 4 times now. He's like, I don't give a shit about sustainable growth. He's like, I want to know how you're going to grow 200% next year and return 10x on my fund. Yeah. And I was like, wow, okay, so like we're not aligned, right? Like this is not, they're not the investors for us and vice versa, right? And so I think having those conversations up front is really important.
Super important.
And like, just being confident that like, you can build a great business, like always saying you're going to be the thing in the fund that returns like 50x or whatever, or the unicorn, or raise $1 billion or become worth $1 billion or whatever. Like, I know that's kind of the cool thing, but actually there are a lot of other really cool businesses out there that haven't done that, and they're adding a ton of value and they've built great cultures, and so there are many different paths. It's not all like TechCrunch.
Yeah, for sure. I think people forget that way too much.
Yeah,
like that. Not everybody can be this, and it's not a failure if you build like a good business. Like you built a good business.
Yeah.
Gonna jump to some questions. We have someone's up here, but if you have any, I think there is somebody who has a microphone as well. Okay, I guess I'll start from the top. What is the one SaaS tool you can't live without, other than DueDil, obviously?
Other than DueDil.
And Paddle.
Salesforce is kind of the obvious answer, even though there's a lot of things. There are a lot of things about Salesforce that I'm sure frustrate people. But
that was a very diplomatic version of that. Yeah,
that's just a kind of you got to have it. And I would really love for DueDil to be in that position someday. Where I hope people still continue to like us, but I would love to be in that position. Like I can't live without it. So one of the things that we've brought into our kind of ops stack recently, which we're still at the really early days of, but we looked at this market a lot and had to really thought about what vendor we were going to go with. We've recently brought Heap in, and that's so far proven really useful because of its configurability. I think there are probably other things that maybe do things out of the box that are maybe useful for earlier on in a business, but when you need a high degree of configurability, Heap has been really useful so far. I think still early days, but early returns are good.
Awesome. In the last year, have you learned any hard lessons from the things that didn't work out as you expected? I think this has all been like pretty hard lessons from things that you didn't work out as you expected, but any that really stick out? So I mean, I guess the first thing I would say is if you're thinking about starting a company, like that's a pretty good headline for like the whole journey. It's like things that were hard that didn't turn out the way you expected, right? If I think about really, concrete lessons, there's lots of things that didn't turn out the way that I expected, and were difficult, like hard lessons. The thing that I think I've learned from them and that I will continue to do was that, it's kind of going to be okay as long as you understand who your main stakeholders are and you do a good job of communicating with them, right? Because there's a real fear, like when you're doing something that's uncertain or moving fast and breaking things or whatever cliche you want to use, right? There's like it's just messy, right? You get inside of a company that's scaling quickly. Successful, unsuccessful, doesn't matter. If it's scaling quickly, you see how the sausage is made and you're like, ooh, this isn't what I thought it was going to be, right? So that's okay. I think, and people like really worry, and I know I experienced this at one point where you're like, oh man, I've got to like manage perceptions and pretend that everything's cool and we're crushing it and, everybody understands that we're like, we're executing on our plan, everything else. I think I've been surprised at, the tolerance that people have within the business, within the board, with other investors. Like, they're not dummies. Like they know that things don't go according to plan, and so I think you can kind of relax a little bit and just
keeping the communication going really builds trust quickly and, gets them emotionally invested in the outcome. And I've been super pleased that, all of our investors have been really, really supportive because I think, they believe in what we're doing. We have, executed, and so that helps build confidence. But, we also have, been really open and honest about when we haven't done things according to plan and signaled that early and, kind of brought solutions to the table, right? Yeah. It's like you can't just say, oh, we missed the target. You're like, we missed the target, but here's what we learned, here's what we're doing now. And people are generally like, okay, that's cool.
Yeah. I think as well, the thing that everybody kind of underestimates is even those people in TechCrunch, the ones that are in there really frequently. Like if you go behind the scenes and like peek behind the curtain of like what those businesses are actually like, it's usually pretty chaotic and there's usually a lot more stuff wrong than anyone would actually believe to be true.
Yeah.
Certainly the case here. So
yeah, but also I think it's important to realize as well that, when you leave and you go on to your next thing, it's generally the like crazy chaotic times that you reminisce about,
Yeah.
and that's the thing that like binds people together and, people gel over.
Yeah. How did you pivot the sales strategy and messaging into closing larger target accounts? Who was involved in that process?
Yeah, so it was really a whole team effort. But I think for me as a leader in the business, it was important that I was also like on the front lines having these conversations because, as I was representing this back to the board and other stakeholders in the business, I needed to have a certain degree of conviction that this was actually like the right thing to be doing. And the only way you get that is by jumping in the trenches, right? And so, there was a long period last year where I was, in sales meetings with people on our business development team, leading sales conversations, right, to sort of build that conviction and kind of figure out what the path forward looked like.
Cool. Are there any questions from here? There's one there, I think.
Yeah, so there's one for this actually. Yeah. So you mentioned that your business is currently a leader in the market, which is a remarkable achievement. This means that you must have a really good technology infrastructure. So what is the number of your developers' total count?
Yeah, so the engineering is about a third of our business, product and engineering. We didn't hire a non-technical person probably until we got to about 20 or 25, which I wouldn't necessarily say is the right thing to do, but that's what we did. So I mean, technology has always been, that's always been our angle on the market. It's always been a huge part of our culture. So technology's, product engineering is still roughly a third of our overall headcount.
That's amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
I like this one. I don't know if you'll want to answer it, but like, what's the ideal future plan for the business? Stay independent and grow organically, sell to a larger traditional competitor, list it.
Yeah.
What's the...
So, I really, I really want DueDil to kind of have an impact. That's my, that's the thing I want to see more than anything else is like, I want to see us deliver on our vision and have a big impact, right? Impact at scale. I think how we achieve that, there are multiple ways. You can achieve that through all of those means that were listed up there, right? But I think, again, coming back to your point around understanding, the other people you're in it with and what their expectations are and making sure you're aligned around that is really, really important. So, prior to the previous funding round, because we had some of our investors who were doubling down and had been in the business for a while, we had a, kind of pretty serious conversation with them around like, okay, if you guys are coming in, then you're signing up for a new tour of duty here, right? Mm-hmm. Because we haven't achieved what we want to achieve. I know maybe it's taken longer than you ideally wanted and whatever, but we've got new investors, you need to be aligned to them. So if you're participating, then you're kind of agreeing to go on a second tour of duty here with us, right? We can't have one group that thinks we're, on a 5-year path and another group that's on a 12-month path, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think we'll take one more from up here, and then if there's any others, and then I think wrap up. Which one of those do you want to go for?
The last one.
Okay.
So I think this is a really important thing that people should be more honest about. There is a lot of luck in this game. Like, there just is. And I think anybody who's at all humble and honest will tell you that. Being smart and hardworking and doing all the things you need to do to build a great business are sort of like prerequisites. You can do all those things and still find that you're in a market that's smaller than you thought it was, or that something changes overnight and Facebook releases its own currency or whatever, right? And it just kind of torpedoes everything, right? So there is luck, and luck breaks both ways. And so I just think that it's not to say that it should impact your decision-making process, because that's kind of outside the realm of your control. But I think it's helpful to be aware of that so that you remain like somewhat humble and
sane.
And sane, exactly, because you're going to catch some good breaks and you're going to catch a lot of bad breaks, and that's just the way it is. Cool. So I would say, if I had to put a figure on it, I don't know, maybe like at least probably 25% of success, I would say, is down to luck.
I would agree. Are there any more questions from the folks here before we wrap up? One there.
So I guess the value of your product is largely based on the data within it. So I guess two questions relating to that. How do you make sure that your data remains current and up to date? And I suppose related to that, given that all of that data is ultimately public, how do you defend against competitors kind of copying what you do with the same underlying data?
Yeah. So this is a really important question, and something that we, really kind of, there was a lot of arguments about early on. So, data is absolutely core to what we do, and yes, there is a significant portion of the data that comes from publicly available sources. What it's forced us to do is actually, kind of look at ways of enhancing the value around that information, right? And that happens primarily in two ways. One is through derived data, so taking two data sets that might be publicly available and making a proprietary data set off the back of it. It generally comes as a result of solving some kind of machine learning problem or matching problem, right? So this is where we have a real advantage over our competitors, because of the technology stack we've developed and the machine learning and AI and everything in the background. It not only gives us a way to ingest this data more efficiently, keep it, make sure it's more accurate, so on and so forth, but we actually start to generate proprietary derived data off the back of the stuff that we're ingesting, right? So that's kind of one additional layer of value. The second additional layer of value is really at the application layer, right? So it's like, okay, you have this data, but ultimately you want to do something with it. It needs to make a decision. It needs to help you action something, right? So let's think about the ways that people are actually employing that data in their workflow to help them make a decision quicker, better, faster, whatever, right? So I think that is ultimately a big part of how we made that transition from kind of freemium company's house on steroids to enterprise level application. It's focusing more on the application layer and all of the unique insight that you get through the combination of these different data sets.
Awesome. I think there's one more question. I'll take it just because I saw you.
How important was optimizing your pricing to your success in DueDil?
I know why you're asking that question, having spoken with you. So I would say that pricing is still a big opportunity for us. We have prioritized simplicity and transparency in our pricing over probably value maximization. And the reason for that was twofold. One is, when you're building a company quickly, you need to minimize the degrees of operational complexity. Also, we operate in a market where the competitors aren't very transparent about their pricing, and pricing is kind of all over the shop, and you end up walking away with this feeling that the pricing you get is a function of like whether or not they think you're a sucker and how hard of a bargain you drive and everything, which is totally wrong, right? So, we've sort of probably over-indexed on like simplification and transparency around pricing, even if it means that we're ultimately leaving money on the table with some of our clients. So I think pricing is something that we will look more at in the next, 6 to 12 months. But for right now, pricing isn't really a conversation that we have with people a lot because they're sold on the value, and that's kind of a good place for us for right now.
Awesome. I think we'll wrap it there. I want to say a big thank you to Justin for spending the time with us, and thank you all.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for sitting on benches for an hour and listening, and giving up your Tuesday evening. So I want to give you a little DueDil goodie bag
thank you very much
for hosting us.
Amazing. Thank you.
So there's some DueDil swag in there.
Amazing.
And I think we've got some other swag and things in the back there if people want to pick that up on the way out.
Cool. So definitely pick that up on the way out. I think we have pizza in about 10 minutes if you want to stick around for that, but feel free to grab a drink, converse, enjoy, and thanks again.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.